People often underestimate what a product actually is and the level of effort it takes to build one that can scale.
The difference between a prototype and a finished product. It's not even the design or how it looks. It's all of these other things that go into making a product polished.
The hidden details are the difference between your product being mediocre and it being brilliant. That's what I mean by hashtag product polish.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode. In-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
On today's episode, we want to talk about the hidden details that are the difference between your product being mediocre and it being brilliant. We want to talk about how to polish your product so that it's absolutely incredible, delightful, and ultimately retains users and grows super fast. We're going to talk about telemetry, onboarding, responsive layouts, error states, notifications, configuration, network effects, marketing automation, customer support, and retention tactics that all combine together to make your product so incredible that people can't help but use it. All that and much, much more on today's show. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. You know what product polish looks like on a podcast, Chris? It looks like the TSP Pact. This is how we get our network effects going. Please, if you love our podcast, if you want us to keep making it, if you want us to get the best guests, please like, follow, subscribe, tell people about our podcast, and that is how we grow, and we will be incredibly grateful. Thanks so much. And with that, let's get into it.
All right, Yaniv, today I wanted to talk about the concept of polished products and what that really, really means. I have this hashtag I use a lot on social media called product polish, hashtag product polish. Those who have followed me for quite a while probably have seen me post my product polish posts. Sometimes I'll be commenting on just a beautiful little detail in an existing product, or the failure of a detail in a product, or a consideration maybe I was working on that day or that week that I thought was a really important but small detail. And I'll tag it hashtag product polish.
It's funny, Chris. I just thought that you were into products from Poland. This gives me a whole new view on it. I was like, oh, what's this product polish all about?
That's also true, Yaniv, but this is a slightly different topic. I've had some friends, followers, and listeners say to me, hey, you should do an episode explaining what product polish is and take us down the rabbit hole of what that really means. So today we wanted to go through some, not all, but quite a list of ways that a product manager, that a cross-functional team can really, really dig deep and grind to polish a product to a degree such that the user can kind of see their own face in the reflection. That is just gorgeous, and it's firing on all cylinders, and it's engaging, easy to onboard, easy to understand, easy to use, low time to value, and ultimately retentive and drives growth, ultimately hockey stick growth for your startup.
I'm really excited about this one, Chris. And part of the reason is, one thing that I see that people often don't understand is the difference between a prototype, right? You've got something in Figma and then you've built a prototype out of it. The difference between a prototype and a finished product. And it's not even the design or how it looks. It's all of these other things that go into creating a complete product. And there are a lot of things that go beyond just the core, does it do what it's supposed to do? And does it look how it's supposed to look, more or less, that go into making a product polished? Understanding that, I think, is one of the keys to being a founder who can drive fantastic product and the sort of growth and leverage that comes along with that.
This really goes to the subject that we've discussed over and over and over again, which is people often underestimate what a product actually is and the level of effort it takes to build one that can scale. And so that's why being sales led and selling whatever you can to whoever you can is a real fool's errand, because you are mitigating, you're eliminating the space for your team to actually polish the product and therefore make the product scalable and retentive and create value. And so these are just some of the details that make product really hard to do and really hard to do well, and therefore hard to scale if you don't pay attention to many of these details. So the very first thing we want to talk about for polished product is actually behind the scenes, and it's called telemetry. It's the wiring up of your product such that you as a product team, an engineering team, a business team can observe the behavior of users when they make contact with the surfaces of your product. Do they hit the sign up page but not sign up? Do they sign up but not click through wizard step 1? Do they get through wizard step 1 but they don't go to wizard step 2? Do they create a project or not? Do they invite a friend or not? How do they interact with the page, and where do they stop, and what do they linger on? All of these are forms of telemetry that give you visibility into what the hell users are doing with the product in the first place, which can then drive some of these other areas of polish where you can go, oh, there's a rough spot there. There's a hook nail there. We need to grind. We need to polish on that piece. So the first thing we want to talk about is something that users never see, but might actually drive a lot of the areas of investment you make in the product.
And we were debating as we were planning this episode, Chris, whether we should put this first. And the reason we decided to put this first is because it is foundational to so many of the other things you need to do in order to polish your product. And the way to think about this is if you don't have this sort of fine-grained telemetry, sometimes called event tracking, in place, then you are flying blind. And I'll tell you what will happen, because this is what happens with every product. You create your product experience and you'll have some metrics, right? Even without telemetry, you'll be like, oh, okay, this is how many people completed checkout or whatever. You'll be like, oh, okay, we have like 1,000 visitors to the site and only 3 of them actually checked out. Let's say you're an e-commerce store. And so then the next obvious question is, what's going wrong? Why are we losing so many users along the way? And guess what? If you don't have your telemetry in place, you have no way of answering that question. So you're kind of helpless. You're sitting there going, I've got a big problem and I have no idea what it is. I have no idea about the why. All I know is I'm not getting the numbers I want at the end, but I don't understand, is there a pop-up that's blocking the button on some browsers? Are people pressing the wrong button and getting confused? Are they freaked out by the messaging at a certain point of my checkout funnel and they seem to all be dropping off there? You don't know. And so all of these other aspects of polish, but even beyond polish, all of the things that we talk about when we talk about being agile and being a learning organization, iterating quickly, if you don't have the feedback loop, telemetry is about feedback. If you don't have that feedback loop in place in a way that you can actually action all of those things, you're not going to be able to iterate. And that's probably one of the root causes of this kind of flailing where you're like, this didn't work, let's try something completely different. Instead of this didn't work, let us learn about the exact ways in which it didn't work so we can refine and iterate. And there's that word, polish the experience for your users.
Yeah, that's right. Telemetry is the fuel that lights the fire of polish. It is the means by which you turn an MVP into a product. It is the means by which you turn product into product market fit. It is the primary mechanism by which you decide where to invest and when to do many of these other things we're going to talk about today, and how to do them and whether they're working or not. I think we landed on putting it first. I think that was the right choice because it really does inform the rest of this.
And the good news is instrumenting your product with telemetry is easier than it's ever been before. There are a lot of out-of-the-box tools that allow you to have really quite deep telemetry and even recording user sessions, for example. So you can see how an individual user interacted with your app in real life and that sort of thing. So there's not much of an excuse not to do this, right? Like it used to be hard, and even then it was important. Now, if you don't have that telemetry in place, you are absolutely missing a trick. So do not think that you have a viable product until you do this.
I would go so far as to say if you don't have telemetry, at a certain point, it's a bit of malpractice. You're not really managing the product. Yep. You're just shooting in the dark. Now, this may date the episode at some point, but from my taste right now, the tools I really like to use is Segment, where you can send off events from the app to Segment, which is like an event router. Segment actually gives you a lot of tooling itself, but it lets you route the events to other tools like Mixpanel and Intercom and others, which allow you to really break down the behavior and understand where the funnels go. And so take a look at Segment, look at Mixpanel, look at Intercom. These are really important telemetry tools, and also Intercom in particular is a great marketing automation tool, which we'll talk about later on in the show. Now, the next thing we want to talk about, this is sort of in the order of customer journey, but for me, it's very, very important. And for me, it comes sooner than many people will put it. And that is onboarding. For my money, Yaniv, and this is not true universally, I don't think everybody would agree with me, but if the product is not self-serve, it's not really a product. That might have a nuance to it if it's a big enterprise like security system or whatever. But the opportunity for an end user to be able to self-serve onto that system after it's been deployed is a form of self-serve. But all things being equal, I'd really like the entire product to be self-serve. I think that's really important. It's more important to me than to some people. And therefore, for it to be self-serve, onboarding needs to be incredible and incredibly polished. So that means I can learn about it on your website, I can sign up on your website, and I can start using it immediately without getting a demo, talking to a salesperson, or getting stuck in some kind of unnecessary lag. And so figuring out that initial sign up process and making it really a low barrier to entry is really, really important to really dial in and polish your product.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing, right? You talked about it's important to make it self-serve, but there is self-serve in theory and there is self-serve in practice. And that's really what onboarding is about. Casey Winters, who we actually had as a guest on our podcast a long time ago, about 2 years ago, used the term new user experience, or NUX. It never really took hold, but I actually really like that because it's really about saying, okay, the first time you use a product, you're not familiar with it. You don't understand the metaphors. You don't understand the object relations or anything like that. You are faced with it for the first time. So you are self-serving, right? Now, how are you going to get your hand held so that you have a fantastic first-time experience? Because your first experience is going to be the most important. On a self-serve product, if you don't have a good experience the first time, you're probably not going to come back. And so I think Casey also said in his view, this is the most underinvested in aspect of all of product and growth, is making sure you have a fantastic onboarding or a fantastic new user experience. And this doesn't necessarily mean the really obvious stuff like having, a wizard or one of those like walkthroughs. It can include that, but it's more really about thinking the first time someone encounters your product, how can you make sure they have a wonderful experience and get to that aha moment, get to value with as little friction as possible? You will never have as many users as you have first-time users. And so you need to make a good first impression. And that is what onboarding is all about.
Yeah, I mean, it boggles my mind that too many teams underinvest in this. It is so fundamental and so important. You use this phrase time to value, Yaniv. Time to value is one of the primary ways that you measure the quality of your onboarding experience. How quickly does someone get value out of your product? And just before time to value, there's time to grok, I would call it. I just made that up. It's that how quickly do they understand what the hell is going on, even before they get that final dopamine hit of value. And so the time to grok and the time to value is so important. Now, there's a lot of strategies here, and so we want to do a hop, skip, and a jump through some of them to talk about how to make incredible onboarding experiences and to really, really grind on this polish. So the first is having really, really great empty states. If you have a list of entities, right, let's call it your order history for your e-commerce platform. So let's say you're trying to build something like Shopify and you have no orders yet. There are no orders yet in the orders table. Is the orders table just an empty table? It's just like blank with some headings? Or does it help the user understand what would be here if and when you are using the product successfully? Is there a silhouette there to show what the data might look like? Is there placeholder data? Is there instructions for how to start filling the data in? Publish and promote your store to start getting orders. But that empty state, I would say, is one of the most important things for immediate understandability in that first onboarding and self-serve journey. Related to this is great defaults, right? So a lot of software, especially software that's being driven by sales requirements, has lots and lots of configuration. And, there's actually a whole episode we can have about being opinionated about the best practices and the workflows and the level of configuration in your software. But to the degree that there is any configuration, you need great defaults so that users get the best experience without touching and making any choices. and it should just kind of work out of the box. Those are two things that are really, really important for that first start, that onboarding experience.
And like the way I think about this, Chris, is the first time you come into the product, do you want to be faced with this sort of blank experience that's cold and unfriendly? Or do you want an experience that pulls you in, that says, okay, here I am, start using me. Here are some great ways you can use me, right? And it's like, that is the difference. There is nothing worse than the sort of inert product that does nothing for you and leaves all the initiative up to you, right? Think of it as a bit of a courtship. You're on a first date. The product needs to make some moves. And that's sort of how I feel about this sort of default experience.
Yeah, for a great example of a popular new product is ChatGPT, right? When you open it up, it has like 4 or 5 example prompts right there in the middle of the text box, right? It's not just a blinking blank text box. It says, hey, here are 4 or 5 things. You can actually just click on them and it'll insert that as the first prompt. That's a very simple example of an empty state that is fantastic. Yeah. And, you might call that a great default. Some people listening to us might go, well, there are a lot of different ways of using my product, or a lot of different pathways, or a lot of different use cases. Another way of doing defaults, or at least narrowing the universe of first steps, is using templates. So if your software is very complicated, or there's a lot of different ways of using it, different use cases, offering some templates is a great way to reduce that complexity and drive up the polish. You can think of Google Slides, for example, or Canva. When you first fire it up, it says, what kind of project are you doing? Let us help you set up the canvas and set up the environment to meet the needs of that project. And there are even starter templates that actually set up a whole bunch of stuff on the canvas that you can edit and modify. So really fantastic templates are a place to start. But then there's some more fundamental stuff, like when you first land in the product, is the visual metaphor immediately understandable? And by UX metaphor, by visual metaphor, what I mean is Tinder is a deck of cards that you swipe through, right? ChatGPT is a chat metaphor. It looks like Messenger or SMS. Google Docs is a sheet of paper, and it's designed in such a way that it looks like a document within an authoring environment. These are UX metaphors. They convey something about the behavior and purpose of the user interface. And there's no words, there's no coach marks, there's no wizard, there's no help text, there's no documentation needed. You look at it and your brain immediately understands the way you're supposed to touch it, the way the information is being served to you. And dialing in the UX metaphor is very, very valuable work. It sometimes takes a few tries, but that is a level of polish. That is a facet of polish that can drive time to value, time to grok, and help users feel at ease, at home in that first start experience. Related to this is the affordances. The affordances are things that people can click on, or slight UI touches that suggest how a surface is interactable or what it means. So an affordance might be a drop shadow on that document in Google Docs. It might be a button with a certain treatment when you hover over it. Maybe the one button is blue because that's the primary action button and the others are gray because they're the secondary buttons. But affordances are these subtle UI cues that help the user grok, help the user understand what the metaphor is and where they're supposed to touch and prod and slide and drag. And so these affordances are a bit more subtle than the metaphor. They're the details of the metaphor. And these are often overlooked, that are the difference between a usable product and a polished product.
There's a fantastic book called The Design of Everyday Things, and that talks a lot about affordances. And, this can be as simple as something like a door handle. Like, does a door handle make it clear whether you should be pushing or pulling the door, right? These are these cues. It's a way of designing things so that the right way to use it is obvious and the wrong way to use it is either impossible or difficult, right? So by default, you use it the right way. And again, that speaks very much to good design, good usability. This goes beyond just onboarding, right? But it's particularly important. And I think that's why it's right to have it here, Chris, during that new user experience, because people haven't learned, right? Like, you live in your house for a while, you've got a door that looks like you should pull it, but you actually need to push it. You learn that, it's okay. But when you first go into that house, when you first move in, that's when the good affordances are really important. So again, this is so important for new user experience.
Let me put a very fine point on that, Yaniv. So what do you mean by a door that looks like you need to push it, right? So a door on one side is potentially, let's say it's a one-way door and you got to push it from one side and pull it from the other. Well, the push side should not have a handle. It should have a plate and you push. And on the pull side, you should have a handle where you can pull. Now, 99.9% of people will not notice that, but they will by default, automatically, subconsciously, they will interact with it the right way, and they will feel like heroes. They will feel like that door is just a great door, and they will not know why. And that's what you need to achieve in your product. You need to make people feel like a hero, and that there doesn't need to be a single word spoken, a single help doc read for them to know that they're going to push that door versus pull it. And they'll just do that every time. Another related subject is word choice and copy. And so word choice and copy is sometimes on the affordances, like on the button. There's like save or next or back. That's a physical part of the affordance. But sometimes the word choices are in the information hierarchy on H1s and H2s, on headings and subheadings. Sometimes it's in the header. Sometimes it's a menu item. Sometimes it's a label on an icon. But I'm often fond of saying copywriting is 50% of UI and UX. It is often separated. Often the UI and product designer will like design something and there'll be a copywriter who dials in the words. And I'm like, bullshit. You have to think, what is this entity called? And why would somebody click on it with confidence? What is the name of this section? What is the information hierarchy? And oftentimes you'll see product managers or companies that overbrand everything. So if, let's say, the company's called Acme, this is called Acme Profile and Acme Score and Acme widgets and Acme orders. And it's like, what is an Acme widget, right? And what is an Acme Score? I have no idea. Just call it a fraud score. That's it. If you're an e-commerce platform like Shopify, you don't need a Shopify score. You need a fraud score, and just call it what it is, right? And so this is where copywriting, word choice is so critical in the first start experience and the new user experience for time to grok and time to value. But it, of course, becomes critically important for just using the product day to day as well. I'll go through the next couple of key areas of polish here in the kind of the first start, the onboarding thing, quite quickly. The rest are short inline explainers, right? So is there a line of text under the heading, which is like fraud score calculated by the shopping history of each shopper? Just one line, little helper text, or a little eye icon next to it that you can hover over. Can I understand what this is at a slightly deeper level? Again, without having to resort to the documentation. And then finally, for onboarding, especially, is coach marks and walkthroughs. I have deliberately put this at the bottom of the list because you should only use these if the other strategies failed. And so you've got great metaphors, great affordances, great inline text, great empty states, and people are still a little confused. Then, and only then, would I resort to finally polishing the product with a little bit of like, hey, over here is this drawer, over here are these main controls, and over here is your main authoring space. Good luck. Have a great time. And so I would resort to that as a last resort.
That's right. It's nearly a sign that you have not quite been able to succeed in creating a wonderful new user experience. And you're like, okay, we're just going to have to brute force this thing and walk people through it because we know it's hard to understand. We tried to make it easy to understand. We didn't totally succeed. And so because of that, we're going to have this walkthrough. I think they're much less effective than people think they are, probably less effective than they used to be. I don't know about you, Chris, or listeners, but whenever I launch a new product and I get a walkthrough, I'm like, hey, I normally just click close, because I don't want to do things at their pace. I want to do things at my pace. Yes. I don't like that feeling of being railroaded through a set of activities. It's a sign of failure. We all fail sometimes, so never say never. Like sometimes you have to use these things, but as you say, Chris, very much only when you've exhausted the possibilities of more direct ways of improving the experience.
Now, it's important to note that these ways of polishing the product and the onboarding experience are not just applicable to the whole product, but also to minor and major features. And so if you are opening like a whole module or whole capability, a meaningful new feature, it should have its own sort of mini onboarding, right? Where there's a great empty state, there's great vocabulary, great affordances, maybe a new UX metaphor is needed. So don't just think of this of like, how do I onboard users into the product, but actually also how do I onboard them to new areas, major areas of the product and new features as I build them. And this is really important. It's like, again, to go to the top of my first comments, this is why building great products is so much harder than people think and takes so much longer than people think, because every one of your features needs everything we're talking about here to be polished. It needs telemetry, it needs an onboarding experience, and it needs many of the other things we're about to talk to through the episode. The next area of product polish is responsive design. Would your product benefit from working both on mobile and desktop? Maybe you're mobile first and you've underinvested in the desktop experience. Are you desktop first and you've underinvested in the mobile experience? These two experiences don't necessarily need to be at parity. So you might have kind of like an authoring experience on desktop, whereas you might have a read-only or sharing experience on mobile or vice versa. Sometimes that's appropriate, but have you considered the right use cases, the right personas for both desktop and mobile? And have you made sure that your app doesn't shit the bed, especially if it's web-based, when the user is on the wrong device? This is an obvious and important area of polish that I think a lot of people generally think about, but is often overlooked if a team is scrappy and hungry and just powering through to the next feature.
Even to broaden this out a bit, there are two things that you cannot, or at least should not control about your users. One is the type of device that they're accessing your product on. And two is the abilities and the limitations of the user themselves. So I'd nearly broaden this out to, yes, there's like, what is the size of the screen, but also how powerful is the machine? One mistake that I've seen made over and over is that you have a bunch of developers sitting there with the latest Macs with 64 gig of RAM. They're like, product works great for me. And then you release it out into the real world and it's really, really slow. That is unpolished as well, right? And, I'd also add accessibility into this list. Some people might have difficulties with their vision and you want your product to be usable by them too. So good product polish means realizing that you have far less control over the end user experience than you would like. And therefore, your product needs to be able to be adaptable and flexible and robust to all those variances and still provide a great experience.
And related to this, and then the next area of product polish we wanted to talk about was error states, right? It is highly likely that your user is going to bump into problems, right? You can't delete that right now. You can't open that right now. You haven't paid for it. Getting the error states really, really right is really important. I would say it's, probably one of the first things you want to think about. And instead of saying like invalid format for the password, it needs to say passwords need to have a capital letter, a number, and a special character. Like help the user get out of the error state. Error states should really be helpful nudges back towards the happy path. And so spending just an enormous amount of time getting those right, the same amount of time you'd invest in the empty states and you'd invest in the default states. Error states are so important and so often overlooked and are really a clear sign of product polish and something you need to invest in.
I really love how you said there should be helpful nudges. Like so often what an error message, the way it actually reads to a user is like, you're fucked and you're on your own, right? It's just like, yeah, thanks very much, product. That's great that I did the wrong thing. Like, are you going to help me? No. Okay. That's really unhelpful. That's a really bitter experience. The product should be like, oh, something went wrong and here are some things you should do to make it right again. The difference between a prototype and a real product is often in how do you handle these unhappy paths, right? When something goes wrong, it's often more than 50% of the work is to make sure that your product still does the right thing when things are not going as expected, whereas a prototype can afford to simply ignore that.
Yeah, and in an ideal case, actually, there is no error, right? It has a great default and it just keeps humming along. So for example, if you create a document but you fail to name it, well, the default name of the document would be untitled document 1. So if I click save and I don't type in a document name, there's no error state because the field is not empty and the user has been helped along the journey and they feel like a hero. In an ideal case, you're avoiding error states with great defaults and great affordances, but there's always going to be an error and you got to handle it well. The next aspect of product polish is notification. So your user is not going to live inside your product. They're going to go away. They're going to close the tab. They're going to forget about you. They're going to go grab a cup of coffee. They're going to log back in 2 weeks and they're going to go, hang on, what the hell just happened? That's not good for them because they get lost. It's not good for you because they might churn. They might completely forget about you. And so sending users updates about what's happened in their absence, it seems obvious, but there are so many products that do this so poorly. It's kind of bizarre. And it's important to know that notification is not just one thing. Notification tends to take many forms across many surfaces. So there is the notification tray inside the app where there's a little notifier icon with a, click on it and you can see all the notifications and that marks that set as read. There is notification emails, either transactional or summarized. So do you send it right away or do you send it as a daily digest or a weekly digest? There is notification SMS. One of my early startups was building something I called an attention management platform, where we had more urgent information would have a more escalated way of notifying the user, maybe use an SMS or something more interruptive. whereas things that were less important would be more passive and kind of flow by in a news ticker type format. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how do you escalate consumption of attention for notifications. But I'm not saying you have to go quite that far, but you do need to think about all of the mechanisms of notification, all the way notifications might be aggregated, all of the events and circumstances that might generate a notification, and how to make the notifications themselves useful. For example, including the payload in the email rather than forcing them to click through and authenticate and figure out what the hell's going on and on and on. Just making notifications amazing, making them timely, making them relevant, making them contextual. It's a huge, huge area of polish that most companies, most products underinvest in.
And the cool thing about notifications is that they're also a very powerful engagement tool. So their absence indicates a lack of polish, but when executed well, they keep pulling users back into your product in a way that is valuable to them. Now, you have to be careful not to be spammy. If it's not valuable to them, you are not doing good notifications. But if you give people timely, meaningful, relevant notifications, that gives them multiple opportunities to re-engage with your product. And that's probably something you want them to do. So this is really a core part of product polish, and also a fantastic way of getting people really deeply committed and meshed in the product that you're building.
I would argue, actually, one of the major innovations of Facebook, other than the newsfeed in the early days, is their notification tray and their ability to generate incredible notifications with nouns and verbs and entities, and to aggregate those notifications. So it starts off as like Yaniv liked your post, and then it turns into Yaniv and Sally liked your post. Then it turns into Yaniv, Sally, and 30 people liked your post. And hey, your post is trending. This kind of smart notification methodology is so amazing and powerful, and keeps people coming back to that product over and over and over again. And I think many companies, including Twitter, have just completely missed that opportunity. They just don't understand the value of concise, contextual, timely notifications. Really powerful, very powerful feature.
Whoever invented that little red, unread notifications circle, I hope they got a massive bonus.
Absolutely, that's right.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
All right, so many of the things we just talked about might include some configurability, right? So when do you want notifications? What format of notifications do you want? For each feature and notification type, do you want to specify SMS, email, or notification tray, or none? So it's important as part of a polished product to offer the right level of configuration in the configurations section. Now, of course, as I've talked about, you want great defaults, and most users most of the time will not touch that configuration. But organizing configuration by great information hierarchy, by great buckets, by really clear labels, clear toggles. What does it mean if I turn this on or turn this off? What are the benefits and trade-offs? You could spend just an enormous amount of time thinking about the information hierarchy and the vocabulary and the explainers of all of your configuration options. And if you pay close attention to Apple, they've actually redesigned their configuration multiple times over the course of all of their iOS and Mac iterations. And even then, there's still room for improvement. It's huge. It's a huge area of polish and helping your users feel a sense of control over what's going on.
Yeah, I'd say this is a particular type of polish, Chris, that can be easy to underestimate, because it's one of those things that if it's there and well done, people don't appreciate it particularly. But if it's not there, it will enrage them. You're like, God damn it, I'm getting all of these notifications. They're driving me crazy. I love this product, but it's not letting me turn notifications off. And we're just picking on notifications as an example. It can be any number of aspects about how your product works. If you do not give people a control they feel they need, they will rebel. They will get angry about the fact that you are denying them that control. So again, yeah, something that's really important. The way you will see a lack of configurability show up is in increased churn. People will just get sick of using your product because it doesn't meet their needs in some specific ways that you could have easily given them that control over.
Yeah, I think it's particularly egregious with configuration. You're right, Yaniv, but I would argue all of these things, to one degree or another, are these kind of hidden cognitive taxes that users would, over time, they may not, on a subconscious level, may be the reason why they go, fuck this, I'm not using this. even down to affordances where they're like, I don't trust this thing. It doesn't feel right. And I don't understand what these entities mean in terms of the copywriting. But I think you're right that configuration feels like one of the more obvious reasons why somebody would churn more consciously. They'd go, screw this. I can't change the way this is behaving and it's pissing me off. I think you're right. That's a more conscious reason to churn. So another area of really important polish, and this area can be a huge opportunity for your startup, is network effects. This is the idea that every feature, or many features at least, could probably benefit from a multiplayer mode. Even if it's just the ability to share a deliverable, an artifact from your authoring environment, all the way through to inviting others to help you with configuration, with authoring, with engagement in the tool. This not only makes the tool more useful, more teams-based, more enterprise-grade, it makes it more sticky, because when there are more people more deeply engaged in collaborating in your tool, it's less likely that any one of them will churn off, and it's more likely that they'll start to introduce it to each other and grow the product organically. So this is a great way of polishing the product's capability, as well as increasing the product's utility and virality and network effects. And so it's just really powerful, really, really powerful.
I mean, look, what you're talking about is like fairly fundamental or profound enhancements to the functionality. So I think it's possible to debate whether you would consider this product polish versus entirely new feature sets like multiplayer modes and so on. But I think what you should be definitely doing as you polish your product is looking out for opportunities to enhance network effects. And, like the most famous early example is Hotmail. For those of you who are old enough to remember Hotmail, it's now Microsoft Mail. Basically, Hotmail was one of the first free web-based email providers. And they had a footer that they tacked on to the end of each email saying, sent with Hotmail, get your free account now, right? And users couldn't remove that. So every time I used Hotmail and sent you an email, you got a little ad for Hotmail. So there was a sort of network-driven viral exposure that was really the key to growing Hotmail. And so, referral programs, just opportunities to brand yourself in front of people who are not existing users. All of these are things that you should be thinking about in order to have a more polished product, but also in order to drive further growth.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a significant area of investment that is often thought about as a discrete thing. But I often will notice that founders and product managers will not realize the multiplayer potential of the thing they're building and will fail to kind of contemplate it as they're designing the feature and designing the product. I think it's an area of important innovation for most products, but it's also an area of polish where there are often use cases where I need other people to help me. And there are some really non-obvious examples that still should be multiplayer. I'm thinking of like diagnostics companies with test results. That test result should be multiplayer. The clinician should be able to invite the patient, should be able to invite other clinicians, should be able to collaboratively annotate the test result. That is a multiplayer feature. It is a piece of polish that makes that test result so much more powerful and so much more useful. I think it's an incredibly powerful way of building a moat around the business. Now, the next one, this one is malpractice if you're not doing it and doing it early. And this is called marketing automation. Now, if you're not familiar, we talked about notifications, and there are, these are potentially emails that you're sending the user when something important happens in your system. And there are transactional emails, which are like you signed up and it just says, welcome to our system, or you got an order and it says, you got an order, right? And so, there's a blurry line there between transactional emails and notifications, but they're all very important. They're highly utilitarian. They are an important area of polish. But marketing automation is a different kind of email that you need to send as well. And what those are basically, okay, the user signed up, they did onboarding wizard step 1, they did onboarding wizard step 2, but they stopped and they did not complete onboarding wizard step 3. That goes to the telemetry thing we were talking about at the very beginning. You then need to send them an email after 24 hours and go, hey, Sally, thanks so much for signing up. We noticed you didn't finish the onboarding wizard. Here's what would happen next. We'd really love to see you create your first shop with, Acme Shopify. Click here to resume your onboarding journey. This is a inducement. It's a reminder. It's an invitation. It's a form of notification, but it's a delayed notification based on often the absence of an event that invites users to come back into your funnel and complete. And you should be doing this everywhere, on onboarding, on features, just on everything. And so, hey, we noticed you got your first order, but you didn't approve it yet. Hey, we noticed your shop is humming along nicely, but you haven't invited a collaborator to help you. Hey, you invited a collaborator, but we noticed that they didn't do ABC. Every single thing, figure out the happy path through your product, figure out what the absence of taking that next step looks like, and wire up emails that push people through that funnel. And again, I mentioned at the top of the episode, one of the best tools for this is Intercom. It is a kind of CRM designed for self-serve SaaS.
Another very popular one is Klaviyo.
MailChimp is now doing this. So many CRMs are doing this. There are CRMs that have gone from kind of Salesforce enablement and they've worked their way down to marketing automation. And there are many marketing automation platforms that have worked their way up to CRM. For my money, if you're building a digital-first, product-led company, I would try to find one that's started at marketing automation and moved up, because they tend to be a bit more sophisticated and native to that problem. But I'll often tell my teams that I'm advising, if they're not doing this, this is basically straight up malpractice. They're trying to improve the copywriting, they're trying to improve the metaphors, they're trying to improve the screens, they're trying to improve the features, but like whatever you've got, you need to be pulling people through that funnel through reminder emails to come back and try again.
But here's the challenge. Doing this well is really hard. Doing it badly is quite easy. So the degree of difficulty on this is quite hard. Doing it badly basically looks like spamming people, right? You're like, oh, we're sending you all these emails that are simply not welcome. I would say simply having the tool is not enough. This is one of those areas where you kind of need a specialist to do it well. And so the only word of warning I do here is if you can't afford to hire someone, even as a freelancer or a contractor, to set this up well, then you need to watch your step very, very carefully, lest your marketing automation actually become a net negative from a product polish point of view, rather than adding to the experience.
So I would argue actually, Yaniv, that your product manager and your product designer should be thinking of marketing automation as a part of their core user experience. And if they're not good at it, then they should bring in a coach or a mentor or an advisor to help them out. But thinking about marketing automation as part of product and UX is really, really important. Now, as your company matures, you may have product marketers and general marketers who can continue to tune and refine and really dial this in and think about drip campaigns and recovery campaigns and all this other stuff. But the core marketing automations around, hey, you got to this step, but not that step. I like to see my product managers take a great deal of ownership over it, even if they're working with others in the team.
Look, I'm inclined to agree. I'm just saying I've seen that it's very hard and very easy to get it wrong.
Yeah, it's easy to get actually all of this wrong really, really, really easy. So yeah, you definitely need someone with a lot of taste, intuition, experience to coach you and guide you through all of this stuff. The final two things we wanted to touch on for polish here is you may have done everything we just talked about. Your product is humming along. The metaphors are brilliant. The affordances are dialed in. The copy choice is just perfect. Chef's kiss. You've got incredible configuration, incredible network effects.
Mamma mia.
Mamma mia. There's still a chance, a smaller chance, but a chance that users are just going to get stuck. They need help. They need customer support, right? And so you really want to polish customer support. Because as people have heard me say on the show many times, product is the entire experience. Product polish is polishing the entire experience. Customer support is part of the product experience. And so you want to think about embedding video tutorials. You want to think about embedding inline help chat with some kind of AI bot that can escalate to human beings. You want to think about a great documentation center. Maybe it loads up as a right rail right within the product. You want to think about self-serve training programs. You want to think about live training programs led by experts. You want to think about a contact form that as you're filling it out, it says, hey, we have 3 knowledge base articles that seem to match your needs. Is one of these appropriate? Or would you like us to still submit this to support? You want to make customer support so incredibly delightful and think of it as part of your product. And here's the real trick. You need to treat every ticket as a product defect. So your customer support needs to summarize the primary sources of pain and suffering in customer support inquiries and feed that into the product team. And the product team needs to take it seriously and turn those primary concerns into further polish, further refinement, further sanding off the rough edges and getting people to be on the happy path more often.
Yeah, I think that is really valuable. So I think a lot of companies have customer support because you need to have customer support, but thinking of it as part of your product and in particular as a really important feedback loop for your product, that is something that I see is often missing. We talk about unhappy paths, customer support writ large, whether you're talking about human agents or chatbots or a help center or anything like that. That is where people go when the affordances fail, when the product is not entirely self-explanatory or when something goes wrong. And you need to make sure that's a great experience, but also that it helps you in a feedback loop to continue to polish your product. So I completely agree. Most companies I see, they keep customer support in their little box and they don't empower them to be the full product feedback surface that they should be.
Yeah, things go wrong. And as human beings, we know things go wrong and we know that help is sometimes needed. And just because you've ended up with customer support as a user doesn't mean you've had an unreconcilable interaction with the business. Where it becomes unreconcilable is when the customer support also sucks and they don't help you out. If their customer support then is incredible and they help you out of a jam quickly, that's when trust is built. Yeah. And Uber does an incredible job of this. When you have a problem with Uber Eats or whatever, they'll just ask you a couple of questions and they basically trust you, depending on your account history. And they go, no worries, we've refunded the $5 immediately to your account. It's done. And that is a really delightful experience. In my own life, I ordered a bunch of furniture for my new apartment here in Silicon Valley. And one of the companies called me and said, hey, our delivery carrier has noticed that there's a scratch on your bed frame. Like they detected it before they even delivered it. And the customer support team said, we can't quite tell where the scratch is and how meaningful it is from their photos. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to deliver it anyway. And we would love for you to let us know if the scratch is meaningful and what we can do to make it right. And we'll take care of it as soon as we can. And that was like, holy shit, I'm going to order from these guys all the time. Like, fantastic. It sucks that there's a scratch on my bed, but I am happy. I'm happy with these guys and I'm just going to go back to them again and again.
There's actually a name for this, which is called the service recovery paradox, which is a measured phenomenon. This has been studied that says if something goes wrong and then the service recovery, which is the sort of the customer support jargon for like making it right, providing that great experience, providing the refund or the credit or whatever it is, and making people feel like they're being looked after, they will end up with a higher opinion of your company, a higher trust in your product than if everything had just gone right in the first place. So it's such a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's great. There's actually that other phenomena, which asking people for favors actually helps engender their positive emotions about you, which is weird to me because I don't like asking people for favors. That's a big reason why I order from Amazon, by the way. Like I will look for the Amazon shop for a brand, even if I've ended up on their website, because I just know that it'll be tracked better. The return mechanism is better. I'll order through Amazon, all things being equal, just because I know that they know how to deal with that. All right. Now, finally, you've done everything right. You've got the incredible model, the incredible affordances, the incredible copy, the incredible templates, the incredible marketing automation, the incredible customer support. Wow. And the user just like, look, I don't need this bloody thing. I need to leave. I need to delete my account and sign off. There's another aspect of product polish here, which is what you might call retention tactics, where you ask the user, hey, why are you leaving? And if they give a reason, you can then kind of start to take them on a journey. Like, oh, we're so sorry you had that problem. Let us make it right. Here's a discount. Here's a new pricing tier. Let our customer support get in contact with you. Oh, you don't want to pay that much? You think it's overpriced? What do you think is a fair price? And let us set the price to that. And so there are these really incredible offboarding experiences that you can bake into a well-polished product that are just like, I just think they're magical when I see them. Part of me thinks like, fuck you guys, just let me out of this piece of shit. But part of me thinks like, these guys are on it. They've really thought about it. Where I get really upset is when the offboarding experience is better than the onboarding experience or some of the other experiences. But I think that's a really magical and often overlooked area of product polish that you should consider if you've done everything else.
Why the hell not?
Why the hell not? All right, Yaniv. Well, there you go. That's what I mean by hashtag product polish. Now, when people who follow me go, Chris, what does that really mean? I can just link them to this episode and I'll never have to explain myself again.
Folks have listened to this episode and they're like, oh, damn, now I get it. I understand that I've built a product, but it is lacking all of this polish. And that long list, that terrifies me. I need help. Well, what you need is help from a product polish obsessive and a product polish genius. That is you, Chris. How can people work with you?
That's right, Yaniv. I've carved out time in my day to work with a small handful of companies to help them polish their products, polish their company, and ultimately fast forward to the best answers as quickly as possible. You can learn more about that over at chrissaad.com/advisory or subscribe to my newsletter over at chrissaad.com/newsletter. Yaniv, how can people find you on the internet?
And while you're still here, you should be at chrissaad.com/advisory. But if you are still here, I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a bit less of a boring place. So please follow me or even connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Yaniv Bernstein there. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. So just let me know that's where you're coming from. I'll accept your request.
Awesome, man. Another fun episode. As always, catch you in the next one.
All right. See you, mate. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.